Webster defines crunch time as a critical moment or period, like the end of a game, when decisive action is needed. Every sports fan knows this time in the game. Your palms sweat just a little more, your heart races just a little bit faster, and you live and die with every play until the final seconds tick off the clock and you're either celebrating a victory or disappointed by the defeat. The team at Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network understands just how critical these moments are. For us, it begins as soon as the next set of games are on the board. We evaluate the opening lines and any breaking news throughout the week. We cover each game inside and out, whether it's from inside the locker room to a huddle down on the field, the court, or the ice. We take you inside the meeting room with scouts, coaches, and executives. We have our fingers on the pulse of all the sports that we cover: the National Hockey League, NBA, college basketball, college football, and the National Football League. We are the Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network, and we're here to help you find your sports advantage. After all the data has been crunched, we then turn it over to Kenneth for the best analysis around. His unique perspective in both understanding the data and how it applies to the game and how you win is the Crunch Time Sports Advantage. Are you ready? The Crunch Time Jet is fueled and ready for takeoff, and the Crunch Time Express is about to leave the station. Your VIP pass has been approved, so all aboard.
Welcome to the 2024 College Football Team Autopsy Report. An autopsy report is a document that summarizes the findings of an autopsy, an examination of a body after death. It includes details of the examination, tests, and observations performed, as well as the cause and manner of death. Just like a real autopsy report, the Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network College Football Autopsy Report examines a team's body of work after the season has concluded. This report includes a review of the team's season win total and whether they met expectations, key offensive, defensive, and special teams metrics that shaped the season, a deep dive into coaching decisions, including situational play and fourth down aggressiveness, a final season grade, evaluating execution, performance in key moments, and consistency, the final verdict, analyzing what went right, what went wrong, and what must be fixed for 2025. With the 2024 season in the rearview mirror, it's time to examine the patient. To present the findings, we have called in our Chief Medical Examiner and Senior Analyst, Kenneth.
And welcome into the Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network 2024 Team Autopsy Report. Folks, we're heading down to Fayetteville, Arkansas. Time to put the Arkansas Razorbacks on the autopsy table. Folks, 5 years as the head coach there in Arkansas, Sam Pulport Pittman, as we like to call coach, basically a 500 coach during his tenure there. 30 wins, 31 losses. Best season came in 2021 when the Hogs finished 9-4. Last couple of years, though, been a little bit of a struggle. 7-6, 4-8, and then last year's the ability to save his job, getting this team to a bowl game last year and winning that bowl game in the Liberty Bowl. All right, like we always like to do, and if this is your first time joining us, welcome aboard. If you've been with us throughout the series or popped in and out, want to thank you as well. We're going to do as we always do, and not start with the betting win total. Season win total for the Hogs last year was 4.5 wins last year, so was able to exceed that expectation by a game and a half last year. Now, when we look at our in-season composite win total, basically there are 3 specific data points that we will look at to kind of say where a team should finish with the win-loss record. We were spot on with the Razorbacks. We had them at a 6.0. So this team absolutely met that expectation by getting that 6th win last year. Now, let's dive a little bit deeper into those numbers here. your strength of schedule and strength of record, two things that we look at very closely here. And a 5-3-1 strength of schedule, which the only thing about your strength of schedule you really can control is your non-conference. As far as the luck of the draw, if you play in a conference, that's going to be predetermined for you. So 5-3-1, as I mentioned, 18th toughest schedule in college football last year out of 134 teams. Now, let's take a look at their strength of record. Now, this a team cannot control. This is basically from a win-loss percentage, how well did your opponents do throughout their season? 5-5-3. So 54th out of 134 teams. So tough strength of schedule from a power ranking standpoint. Their opponent's win-loss record did not marry up with that. So let's go ahead and dive into those numbers. I said about a 55% winning percentage by their opponents. You're going to see a lot of teams hovering around that 5-7, 7-5 mark. And if you're watching on YouTube or streaming this on our Twitter feed at Crunch Time VIP, I want to say thank you. If you haven't already done so, give us a follow on both of those platforms. If you're listening on your favorite podcast platform, thank you as well. Don't worry, I got you covered with the data here. So let's run through their opponent's win-loss record really quickly. We're going to skip over Arkansas Pine Bluff as they are an FCS opponent. Let's start with Oklahoma State, 3-9. UAB, 3-9. The Auburn Tigers, 5-7. Texas A&M, 8-4. Tennessee, 10-2. LSU, 8-4. Mississippi State, 2-10. Ole Miss, 9-3. Texas, 11-1. Louisiana Tech, 5-7. And the Missouri Tigers, 9-3. So either their opponents were really good or they were really bad. Now, let's get into how good were the defenses that Arkansas went up against last year. And remember, I said there are 134 Division I teams. We're going to use a baseline of 68 because that's how many Power 4 teams there are last year in college football. So how many of your opponents' defenses were inside of that top 68? Folks, these numbers are going to be eye-popping all over the place. The Auburn Tigers were 39th. Texas A&M was 30th. Tennessee had the third best scoring defense for us in college football last year. LSU was 29th. Ole Miss was 4th. Texas was 2nd. And Missouri was 20th. Now, 7 of their opponents were inside of that top 68. Now, outside of the top 100, the Arkansas Razorbacks faced 3 teams that were outside of the top 100. Oklahoma State was 103rd. UAB was 124th. And Mississippi State had the 108th power-rated defense for us last year in college football. Remember I said they had 6 wins? Take a look at how many of those 6 wins came against teams that were outside of the top 100 in defense. You're talking about an average power ranking of almost 49th. That's a defense that would have probably belonged to a 7-5 defense last year, if we're just looking at it from that standpoint. All right, let's go a little bit deeper into their offensive metrics. I'm going to give you in some of these categories the NCAA average, what the team's average was, and then when we adjust for opponents, what that number was. So last year, offense, average team scored about 28 points per game. Both Arkansas's points per game and our adjusted points per game were 30.3 points per game. So about a field goal better than the NCAA average. The average offense last year in college football passed for about 227 yards per game. Arkansas was at 269, but when we adjust for opponent, goes down to 258. Still much better than the NCAA average. Not good as their raw accounting numbers will show. Their run game. Average team last year ran the ball for about 160 yards per game last year. Arkansas, accounting stats say 182. When we adjust for opponent, that actually goes up about 24 yards to 205.5 yards per game rushing. Total offense. Average team last year about 387 yards per game of total offense. Arkansas was at 451. When we adjust for opponent, even better at 464 yards per game. Now, let's dive a little bit deeper. Average team last year, drives ending with a score, touchdown or field goal, about 40% of the time last year. Arkansas was at 45.6, so exceeded that number. Average team last year scoring touchdowns on their drives was about 29%. Arkansas a little bit better at 32.3%. And as far as third down conversion, average team was about 39% last year. The Hogs were just a little bit better at 40.7%. Now, Arkansas did a terrible job of protecting the quarterbacks last year. Average team allowed about 23.5 sacks for the season. Arkansas gave up 34. Arkansas also did a poor job of taking care of the ball. 22 turnovers committed last year. Let's take one more step forward. Our 3 E's. How effective, explosive, and efficient your offense was. When we look at the Razorbacks, 43rd effective offense last year by our metrics. 32nd explosive offense and 40th in efficiency. The Arkansas Razorbacks in 2024 ended the regular season as our 39th rated offense in college football. Let's flip it over to the defense here. And again, we're going to use that baseline of 68. And we're just going to take a look at how many of Arkansas's opponents' offenses finished inside of that top 68. Oklahoma State was 57th. Auburn was 56th. Texas A&M 22nd. Tennessee 26th. LSU 21st. Mississippi State 39th. Ole Miss was 5th. Texas was 6th. And Missouri was 53rd. So none of their opponents finished inside of that top 68. And just 2 of their opponents finished outside of the top 90. UAB at 94th and La Tech at 125. So their average opponent's offensive power ranking, about 46. That's a team that was probably based purely on their offense. 7-5, possibly competing for an 8-4 mark with their offense is about what that number would project to. Now, I'm just going to give you their accounting numbers on defense and then our adjusted numbers. Arkansas's defense was giving up about 24.9 points per game. When we adjust for opponent, goes down to about 21.4, so a little over a field goal improvement there. As far as their passing defense, now their accounting stats, 244 yards per game, but when we adjust for opponent, it actually goes down to 217. So a 27-yard per game improvement based on if we adjust that for opponent. Their rush defense, phenomenal either way you look at it. 122 yards per game rushing. When we adjust for opponent, goes up about 10 yards per game to 131 yards per game rushing. Still solid job there. And as far as total offense per game allowed, 366 yards per game. We adjust for opponent, goes down to 348. So about an 18-yard per game improvement there from what their stats show and what we show when we adjust for opponent. Their opponents' drives ending with a touchdown. Remember I said that the average team last year was about 40%. Arkansas defense was at 33.9%. So certainly better there. As far as drives ending in a touchdown, average was about 29%. Arkansas was at 23.6%, so an improvement there. And they were basically flat with the NCAA average as far as their opponents converting on third downs. 39%, Arkansas's 38.7%. Now, Arkansas generated 21 sacks last year. Their opponents were 16 of 29 on fourth down attempts, 55%. The average last year was about 53% conversion, so just a little bit worse there. Only forced 13 turnovers. Let's look at their 3 E's here on defense. Effective defense, 48th. Explosive plays, 56th. Efficiency on defense, 42nd. The Arkansas Razorbacks ended the regular season for us as the 48th best defense in college football. So if I had to bullet point their offense, I would say it inconsistent but capable last year. And as far as bullet pointing their defense, solid but suspect to give up big plays in big time moments there for their defense. All right, let's talk about the coaching and situational play, as well as special teams. 1-3 in one-score games last year. 2-5 against quality opponents. A -9 turnover differential, one of the worst turnover differentials in college football. 119th out of 134 teams. 7 penalties per game for 62 yards worth of penalties. That doesn't include the hidden penalty yardage there. As far as field goals and special teams, let's go with the special teams. 14 out of 21 field goal makes versus attempts, about 67%, well below the average of 76%. Didn't make all the extra points. 3.4 punts per game, 44.9 average per punt. So I would say special teams overall below average. Now, let's take a look at their splits in the games that they won versus the games that they lost. In Arkansas, 6 wins last year. Offense was scoring 40.5 points per game, 259 yards per game passing on 31 attempts, 8.3 yards per attempt, 13.5 yards per completion. Very solid there from their passing game. I think here's where the big number comes in at. 41 rushing attempts per game for 243 yards per game, 5.9 yards per rushing attempt. Over 500 yards per game in total offense, 6.9 yards per play. Arkansas was averaging 5.2 touchdowns per game to just 1.2 turnovers per game. This team was actually not great on third downs in their wins. Just 34% on third downs. They convert 64% on fourth downs. Only committed 7 total turnovers in those wins. Now, let's take a look at how they did from an offensive standpoint in their losses. This team only scored 20 points per game. Passing yardage goes up to 280 yards per game, but it took 34 attempts. 8.1 yards per attempt, 13 yards per completion. Still solid from the passing game. But a former offensive line coach in Sam Pittman there at the University of Georgia knows that you throw for dough, you run to close the show. 34 rushing attempts per game, for just 121 yards per game rushing, 3.6 yards per rushing attempt. The total yards per game goes down by a full length of an entire football field, 400 yards per game in total offense, 5.9 yards per play, 2.5 total touchdowns per game, 2.5 turnovers per game. They were much better on third downs in their losses than they were in their wins. 42.3% third down conversion in their losses, 50% on fourth down. So there's a difference there. Committed 15 total turnovers in their losses. So let's take a look at the difference between when they won versus when they lost. They were scoring 20.5 points per game. So, folks, almost 3 touchdowns differential there. See, they threw the ball for about 21 yards per game less in their wins, but the rushing yardage basically cut in half. So that's the biggest difference. We talked about it, the turnovers and their inability to run the ball the way that Arkansas needs to run the ball and control the clock when they won versus when they lost. Let me spend a couple of minutes here talking about the quarterback, Taylon Green. So Green should have 1 year of eligibility left with the COVID year. This was his first year starting there at Arkansas. Did spend 3 years at Boise, and looks like his freshman year was a redshirt year, so he got into 2 games and didn't complete any passes. For his career, he's less than a 60% completion percentage, 40 touchdowns, 24 INTs for his career. And when we look at what he did last year at Arkansas, completed 60.4% of his passing attempts, 3,154 yards passing, 15 passing touchdowns, 9 INTs. Just not the kind of ratio you're looking for. Now, I know you're going to ask, how did he do? Because he's considered a dual threat quarterback. 156 rushing attempts for 602 yards, 3.9 yards per rushing attempt, and 8 touchdowns. Now, let's take a look at the defensive breakdowns as far as when they won versus when they lost. In their wins, 15.7 points per game allowed. Their opponents, passing yards per game, 217 yards per game passing on 32 attempts, 6.7 yards per attempt, 10.9 yards per completion. Run defense was absolutely stout as well. Opponents, about 32.5 rushing attempts per game for 108 yards per game rushing, 3.3 yards per rushing attempt. Very solid there. 324.5 yards of total offense allowed in those 6 wins, 5 yards per play. Opponents, 2 touchdowns per game, but Arkansas was forcing 2 turnovers per game in those 6 wins. As far as their third down conversion defense, their opponents only converting 35% in those wins, 50% on fourth downs. Basically 9 out of 18 conversions to attempts on fourth downs by their opponent, forced 12 turnovers, as I mentioned. Now, in their 6 losses, 34 points per game allowed. Passing attempts, still 32, but the passing yards per game allowed goes up to 272 yards per game, 8.5 yards per attempt, 13.6 yards per completion. Now, you're going to ask about the rush defense. Almost 39, let's call it 38 and a half rushing attempts by their opponents for just 135.8 yards per game. 3.5 yards per rushing attempt. So the rush defense wasn't the issue when they lost. They were giving up big chunks through the passing game. 407.5 yards per game in total offense, 5.8 yards per play allowed. Let's see, their opponents' touchdowns per game goes up to 3.7 touchdowns per game. Folks, 0.2 turnovers forced in those 6 losses. Their opponents converting on third downs 44.7% of the time, converting 63.6% on fourth downs. Folks, in those 6 losses, the Arkansas Razorbacks forced 1 turnover. Not going to win a lot of games when you can't force turnovers. So in those losses, they were giving up an additional 18.5 points per game, an additional 55 yards per game passing, an additional 28 yards per game passing. So basically, in those losses, they were giving up 83 more yards per game in total offense to their opponents. And I talked about it, the big number, could not force turnovers. So let's go ahead and get to the final grade and the final verdict for the 2024 Arkansas Razorbacks. The 2024 Arkansas Razorbacks will get a final grade from the Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network at a C+. The reason for that, this team did show the ability to have a capable offense with a strong rushing attack. Competitive defense, especially against the run, in games where they could establish the tempo, they absolutely won. The downside is this team could not take care of the ball. When you talk about having that kind of negative turnover differential, it is absolutely hard to win inside of a major conference like the Southeastern Conference with that kind of negative turnover differential. Let's go ahead and get to the final verdict. Arkansas was a middle-tier SEC team that was able to meet expectations but struggled in key moments. Turnovers and one-score game inefficiencies absolutely held this team back from having a better record. So in our final couple of minutes here, I'm going to give you 3 keys for the Arkansas Razorbacks in 2025. They want to improve on that record and improve their standings in a very competitive conference. 1, first and foremost, you got to improve the turnover margin. Talked about it, -9 turnover differential. 1, that means take care of the ball. And then 2, got to generate more turnovers than what you did last year. Only 13 forced turnovers. Got to get that number closer to 20 instead of where it currently sits. Key number 2, must strengthen the pass protection. Talked about it, giving up 34 sacks last year, way too many. Not all of that is on the offensive line. Got to get the quarterback to do a better job of reading defenses and getting rid of the ball in key situations. 3rd, got to find more defensive playmakers, especially losing Landon Jackson, their best pass rusher, to the NFL. If the Arkansas Razorbacks can improve in these 3 areas, they can absolutely take a step forward in 2025.
Thank you for tuning into this podcast. We hope you enjoyed today's episode and our deep dive into all things college football. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the show on your favorite podcast platform. And if you're watching on YouTube, be sure to like this video and hit that subscribe button. You can follow us on Twitter at CrunchTimeVIP for updates, insights, and more content. And make sure to visit our website at crunchtimesportsadvantage.com for in-depth blogs, game previews, and information about our Crunch Time Express handicapping packages. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time for our next patient on the 2024 College Football Autopsy Report.